Well, hey everybody, you may be looking at my yellow wall behind me thinking, where are you, Joe? I don't recognize this setting. Well, I moved into a new studio and it is a great feeling to be in a new creative environment. I thought I'd take this opportunity to take you on a bit of a studio tour and talk about the equipment I use to make my videos and my recordings to an extent. I've had a lot of requests from people asking me to talk about how I get the sounds I do. I think my studio really serves me well. It's quite a simple, streamlined setup. I love watching studio tours from other people that are interesting to me. So, for whatever that's worth, I hope you enjoy this video. So in this new house I moved to, I set up the studio in the living room, and this space is about 20 feet by 18 feet or 16 feet, something like that. And the ceiling is about 8 feet to 20 feet. It's slanted. It has quite a sweet sound to it, although it's rather ambient, and I'm kind of just getting used to it and figuring out what I'm gonna need to do with regard to acoustic treatment. I bought most of this gear in 2017, so quite recently, and I bought it to make my Undertones album. Now, the album before that, Let Me Introduce You, was extremely expensive. It cost a fortune, and a lot of that was my fault in that I was very particular about getting every part exact, and I took a lot of time overdubbing the exact right guitar part and working on the sounds and the parts. And to do that, while you have an engineer and studio hired, is very, very expensive. So I knew I wanted a way to do overdubs at home, whatever time of day I wanted, and, to take the time to get the sounds and parts that I wanted. So my goal with building the studio was to have just a really high quality, simple setup. As you'll see, I only use 2 channels. And I have really great A to D and D to A conversion, and some nice mics and preamps, some good guitars. Yeah, it's pretty simple, really. And this is what I use, when recording the audio for all the videos that I make, and I do sessions for other people. My next album I've been recording with another engineer and producer in a totally different studio, because this to me is just one way of doing things. I think there is a lot of value in hiring a good engineer to record albums for you. However, for me, I just need to have a space like this that is kind of insurance for me not running up a bunch of bills in overdub studios. I think the most important element of my studio are the stacks and stacks of books lying around everywhere. There's books, and there's more books, and there's more books, and there's more books. There's also guitar cases, amps, more amps, more amps. You don't need all this stuff, by the way. 25 pounds of rye flour I'm going to use for making some sourdough bread. A good backyard with a screened-in porch and a hammock out there. So this is the main microphone that I use for vocals and acoustic guitar parts. It is an incredible mic. It's a C12 made by Bill Bradley, who is a local Nashville mic expert, and he custom built this using new parts, original C12s, a lot of money, and he makes one that he says out C12s any C12, and when I decided to buy this mic, an engineer, a friend of mine, recommended it, and I called Bill, and I happened to live up the street from him at the time in Franklin, and he said, I'll just come around to your house and I'll bring it around and you can plug it in and test it out for a few days. And so he brought it around, And as soon as I heard it, I was like, okay, I need to buy this. And I had the cash at the time. I just got off the road playing some shows and bought it. And I used it on pretty much everything. For electric guitar, I usually use this Royer 121 mic and a 57 as well. And you know, I'll just mic it so that they're both in phase on the speaker, and I find that gets a great sound. And I use the Royer a lot on acoustic guitar too. The backside has a brighter tone, so it's really nice on acoustic guitar. And I use another mic that I'm using to record this audio at the moment, which is an Aston Starlight. And it is a great sounding microphone. It sounds kind of like a KM84 Neumann. And it has two settings. One is like a brighter, more modern setting that I use for like, you know, a voiceover mic like this. But it also has a vintage setting, which sounds more like a vintage KM84 with the high end's a little tame, a little more tamed. So those are the mics I use. I have 3 microphone preamps that I use. One of them is a Cappy VP28. This is a great sounding API style mic pre, and I actually have 2 vintage API op amps in that unit. I bought it from a fellow on Craigslist who was selling 2 of them, and he said he got the vintage op amps from an old console, and those op amps are worth a lot of money. And so I got it for a steal, and I sold one of them and kept the best sounding one. I also use this Neve 1073 Lunchbox preamp, and I use that on vocals and a lot of acoustic guitar. It just has a warm, classic, you know, fat Neve sound. And I have this Rupert Neve 511 preamp, which has a little bit of a more transparent, modern sound. And I use that with the ribbon mic especially. I find it just gives it a little more clarity. The API, you know, has a fat, clean sound. The Neve has a little bit of a more dirty, warmer, vintage sound. And the 511 Rupert Neve pre has kind of just a clean, modern, transparent sound. So those are the 3 preamps I use. I have one compressor. It's an LA2A, and it's a reissue LA2A. You know, it's probably 4 years old now. Great sounding compressor for acoustic guitar and for voice. Now the converters I use are quite interesting. I don't know of anyone else that uses this setup. My main interface is a Universal Audio Apollo 16. So this is 16 in, 16 out. And I only use 2 of the channels. I don't want to have too many inputs. I don't want to, you know, record drums or anything like that. You know, I like the limitation of just using 2 channels. And the reason I use those 2 channels is because I use this Burl B2 bomber for my analog to digital conversion. And this thing has the most phenomenal tone. In fact, I rented a Burl mothership when I recorded Undertones when we did the main tracking at the castle. It was expensive. It was, yeah, quite a bit of money to rent a Burl mothership to bring in the studio. But for me, it's worth it. I really care about the sonic quality. And for D to A conversion, I use this Dangerous Source. It just sounds great. Compared to the Apollo D to A converters, it sounds much better. You can hear the reverb tails more, the stereo image is better. And yeah, that's a really good upgrade. I bought that used. In fact, it has a South African power supply with a little attachment to make it fit a US plug. But it's a great unit. When I make videos, I try to keep things really simple. I just use one camera here. It's the Canon 80D, and I have a little lens that's an EFS 24mm prime lens. I just set it up on a little tripod here at the edge of my desk, and I press the red button, and I look at it so it focuses on my face. and it does a pretty good job with autofocus, it seems. I just shoot at 23.95 frames per second or whatever that setting is, and 1080p, it works great. And then I have the audio going through Pro Tools and all my preamps and whatnot, and then I just pull them into Final Cut Pro and I press synchronize clips, and it magically synchronizes them, and then I just trim the ends off, and it's just simple as that. That's all I do. For software, I use Pro Tools. That is the most common DAW here in Nashville, and it's nice to be able to go into another studio, record tracks, bring them home, mix them, edit them here, do overdubs here. That's how I made Undertones. Some people will just send me stems, and it doesn't really matter what workstation I'm using, but I just use Pro Tools. I used to use Logic as well, and I think Logic has some great features, but I got really into Mix with the Masters, which is a website. It's like a subscription website where you can watch mixing tutorials from a lot of incredible mixing engineers. Some of my favorites are Jakia King, who's a friend of mine as well, and Chad Blake, Andrew Sheps. There's all kinds of great people who have mixing tutorials, and I watched every video on that channel and got really into mixing, and they pretty much all use Pro Tools. Yeah, it's a native interface running Thunderbolt into my little Mac Mini here. So that's it. For speakers, I use these Amphion 118s, and they are really, really great sounding speakers. They're so flat, they're so detailed, they don't fatigue your ears. I also use Yamaha NS10s. They're not set up at the moment. I need to get some kind of a speaker stand desk situation here that works for them. I also have some old JBL 4412s and some KRKs, and those are great sounding speakers as well. When I'm mixing the audio, usually I'll just put a high pass filter on the channel, then I'll use like a compressor, because there's probably some uncontrolled dynamic range that I need to tame a little. And I like to use the Fairchild a lot on vocals and acoustic guitar. I like an 1176 on electric guitar. And on the mix bus, I'll use a Neve 33609 compressor. And there's usually an EQ on there as well, doing a little high pass at 30 or 40 hertz. Then I'll go into an ATR 102 tape machine with the noise off, and then I'll go into a Pultec EQP1A just to shape the high and low end a little bit, boost the highs a little and cut the lows, and depending on the track, but that's usually what I do. And then I'll go through a limiter of some kind. I've used a lot of different limiters, and you can get good results with a variety of plugins, I'm sure. And I use this loudness meter, and just to make sure that I'm in the right kind of loudness range for YouTube or Spotify, or make sure I'm not smashing it too hard. And for effects, I usually just use this EMT 140 plate for a little reverb. Sometimes I'll use the Cooper Time Cube for some echo, the Roland Dimension D for some stereo width, or the Sound Toys Echo Boy or the Micro Pitch Shift, just for kind of some stereo effects. These are great sounding plugins, but I don't tend to use a whole lot of effects, but when I do, that's what I use. So I try to make my workflow as simple as possible. I think that's key in having a home studio that doesn't just drive you crazy. So in the back of my rack here, I have just a few little short Megami cables, and if I want to plug in the API preamp, I just go around there and plug it in. If I want to plug in the Neve, I just do that. If I want to plug in the LA2A, it's just real easy. And I think there's some part of my brain that thinks because it's just going straight from the pre to the converter, there's a higher quality sound than if it's going through a patch bay and all that. So yeah, and in my Pro Tools session, I have a template where I just have burl left, burl right, so there's only 2 channels to mess with. And you know, sometimes I record stereo acoustic guitar, but for the most part it's just one mic. That's usually, you know, what I do, and when I'm in studios recording for other people, that's usually what they choose to do. If it's a solo guitar piece, a stereo mic setup is really nice, but yeah, a lot of the times just one mic. I started recording you know, myself when I was really young. I was probably 12 or 13, and I built a computer at home, an old PC, from parts that I scrounged, I forget from where, from friends. I have an uncle who's in technology, and I remember he in the technology business, and he used to give me computer parts at times. And anyway, I just remember having this, you know, stolen, cracked version of Cubase on a computer, and I'd have this dodgy old M-Audio sound card, and I'd plug my guitar straight into it, and I just dream of the day where I could record with no latency. So it's always been a dream of mine to have a really high quality studio. I'm really glad I spent the time learning how to record and studying studio engineering, studying the software, studying great records, learning what makes a great sounding record. I think I have a good ear in some respects. In some respects, my ear is not the strongest part of, you know, my musical skill set. But I think it's important to be self-sufficient as a musician. I think no matter what instrument you play, you should have a way to express your creativity in a way that doesn't rely on other people. That being said, you know, no one makes it alone. You have to have a good team. You have to have good people around you. But yeah, for me, this kind of inbuilt feeling of needing to be self-reliant, I'm really grateful for, especially, you know, during the current COVID-19 global shutdown. Since I can't tour, I'm fulfilling my dream of being a content creator full-time, and I'm really enjoying it. I love being home. I feel so healthy. I get to eat great food from the farmer's market and from local farms, and yeah, just enjoy putting all my creative energy into music. So thanks very much for watching this video. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and I'll do my best to respond.